Hey guys, this is Neil Gewirtz with BlueFirePoker.com, and I'm here continuing my coverage of a session I played at 4Tables of 25 No Limit over on Merge Network. At this point, I'd played this session a couple weeks ago or so I might not be quite as familiar with the coverage as I was during the first video, but it still hasn't been too long, and hopefully I'll be able to have a bit of a better eye as far as maybe if I made some mistakes in hindsight, anything along those lines to go over. But also, like I'm all right, and now I'll also say, it would be a good time now to go back and watch that first video, as I've already discussed some reads and some opponents, talked about a few of my plans for this session. One of the things I was looking to do, not that this is particularly loose, but I was looking to open a bit looser from the small blinds, as you see, to some extent, I did over on table one. And I was also looking to open up a bit on the button. So given our history on table one with Are You Sure About That? The last hand, I'll pause it for 1 second. The last hand, that I reviewed for the last video, got into an all-in pot with him where I was bluffing on the turn and ended up making a very strong hand on the river. And I'm sure my thought process at this point, given that dynamic, is this player might be a bit fed up with me already. He's not folding to my small blinds open, not like he can't just have a reasonable hand to defend with, obviously. That's fairly likely. But he is a tighter player, expecting to be folding there a lot. So just given that he defends and given how drawing coordinated this board is, I thought it was just a bit too likely that I was getting bluff raised. If I bet and do get called, I mean, it's not really a board where I want to be firing once at it, but my equity just isn't going to be great against any continuing range, and I certainly can't call a raise. I felt, given how coordinated the board is, there's a chance he would check behind. I could possibly be check calling this board with some sort of a marginal hand which doesn't want to get blown off with a raise stronger than that I had. Bottom pair isn't quite strong enough to really check call here. So given all that, I decided to just check and evaluate. And when he bets full pot, nothing wrong with check folding. I think I will decide to take a flop with King Jack suited here, and I like this play. Basically, I have a weaker opponent here, putting in a bunch of money. Well, not a bunch of money, but a weaker opponent here, who still has plenty of money left, which I can win. And even though the end of the gun player is short, I think I'd probably take a flop on the button with King Jack suited. Don't really want to free bet and get it in, and can't free bet and fold given these stack sizes. Again, on table one, opening a bit loose on the button. I have a feeling I'll still see bet this board, even given the dynamic against this opponent. And not like it's huge, but like I said, I just want to stack from him. What would have been the equivalent of, I don't know, 5 hands ago, maybe even less. I'm gonna be a bit more careful. Maybe he's tilting, maybe he's not. But King 7-4 Rainbow with absolutely no showdown value. There's just I hope no other option but to make a small bet and figure I'm picking it up a pretty good percentage of the time. And I do that pretty standard there. And I'm assuming I won't continue over here on table three. Obviously, if I flopped a pair or draw, I'd be more than willing to get all in with the shorter stack. A little bit of a lull in the action here. I guess I'll talk about on table one. Again, I've been talking about it a bit. It doesn't seem like an ideal game choice. I've talked about game selection a ton in previous videos. Everyone here just looks like kind of a tight player. Certainly I could open up a bit, try to steal blinds a bit more liberally. I hope I see myself do that. And I'll be able to make some sort of a profit on this table, but you're just going to make more money when players are playing too loose and too passively and giving your money away, particularly at B stakes, where it's just not too hard to find players who are going to play. Certainly something closer to 42-15, or you'll see players playing much looser than that. So, yeah, when you are playing, you see, but 19-11, 18-13, 16-10, 10-10. The loosest VPIP at the table is 19. It's the type of table you want to be considering leaving. I'm assuming, yeah, I defend here with ace-2 suited, in this spot. A tighter, well, it's not a tight under the gun opener, a bit deeper with the under the gun player. I'll pause for 1 second. I guess, so yeah, a bit deeper with the under the gun player, so, a bit more value in flopping, a very big hand, three twos, which would be deceptive, or flush draw, and obviously the weaker opponent in the big blinds, who I expect is coming along a lot. One thing is, I wouldn't normally call here, even with the caller. If it's an under the gun caller, under the gun opener, under the gun +1 caller, I think I fold this hand more often than I defend. I do need a little bit of extra incentive, such as a weaker player in the big blind. Certainly, you should be folding if the big blind is squeezing a lot, if he's an aggressive player. If he's more of a standard player, something like an 18-15, I still think it's a hand which is going to be pretty difficult to profitably play out of position. There certainly are looser players who will do it. It's possible to play it profitably out of position, but if it's going to be difficult for sure, and if you don't have great reads on your opponents, you are probably better off just folding, even with one caller. By the time there's a second caller, or a weaker opponent, or, something to sweeten the deal, I definitely think it's okay to call with this hand, but it's certainly marginal. You are just going to end up check folding a lot of flops, and even when you do flop something, you're certainly not guaranteed to get paid off. Over on table 3 here, I'm assuming given stack sizes, I could basically count all of this, all the money between both of these players' stacks as implied odds. I think I could call here. There's certainly some threat of this, Vachuskenayer, however you might say that, on the button jamming all in, but I wouldn't be too, it's a concern. But he's played pretty passively pre-flop. I think I could probably just set mine here, like I said, considering everything implied odds, and just, if I flop a set, winning enough money just from bat. So I think I'd like to see a call here. And sure, like I mentioned, the button did just come along, did just kind of add to the whole implied odds situation, but I don't flop a set, so I'm gonna be forced to get out of the way. Clearly a bad flop for me on table 2. I can't imagine I'm doing much other than check folding. And over here on table 4, I definitely think I make a mistake here. I bluff raise this player again. If you remember from the last video, I've raised from late position. I believe all of the 2 or 3 other hands, or both, or all 3 of the other hands were from late position. This player's defended, and he's led into me. It was only 2 hands, if I remember correctly. The first one, he outright folded when I raised him on the flop. The second hand, I raised him on the flop, he called, I checked behind the turn, and made a straight on the river, and raised him on the river, and he folded. So, basically, the few hands of experience we've had with each other, and the last video was only 10 minutes of coverage, it's only 5 minutes, so in the last 15 minutes, I've raised him. This would now be the 3rd time on the flop. One thing to point out, the other 2 times he led into me on a flop, he bet 50 cents. Whether it was against my button min raise or whether it was against a 3x open, I don't remember 100%, but he certainly bet smaller both the other times, and now he's betting bigger, and now we have a history. So there's 2 reasons. 1, because my bluff raise is going to be more expensive, and 2, because of that history, there's reason to believe, I don't know what he's doing. I don't know why he leads out every time, but there's reason to believe that because he's betting bigger, he's getting fed up. Maybe he has a hand. I don't know. I remember my thinking at the time is just that it's so ridiculous for him to lead out $1 with a jack here that it seemed even more full of shit to me. It seemed like he was actually more likely to be bluffing at this point than he was either of the other 2 times. But I'm not quite sure if that logic goes far enough. There's not a lot of money in the pot. I could always bluff raise him next time. He doesn't have a lot of money. I don't have much. I almost what I was gonna say is I'd almost prefer a call than a raise. I'd have to think about that a bit more. I'm not quite sure I'll stand by that. I don't know how often I'm getting this to showdown. If he leads and I just call, I would assume he'd see that as weakness and just bet the turn and river. Regardless, he's not going to start getting into check down mode. If he has something, I'm beat. If he doesn't, I'm not getting into showdown. So I don't think I can actually call here. It is razor fold, but I much prefer V fold at this point, given the dynamic, given the decent amount of money I have to risk. Even with the board texture, even though it makes no sense to play a jack like this, I don't know if he's bluffing. I really don't know what he's doing. Given that, just don't know enough of what's going on. Better off just folding here on the flop to the initial bet. And like I said, over on table one, all I'm going to be able to do is, again, an ace on the button, not exactly the loosest open in the world, but all I'm going to be able to do is look to steal blinds and look to pick up positive C bets because players are playing too tight. That's going to be really the best way to exploit them is just picking up some small pots. I hope I double barrel here. My opponent could be check calling this board with a lot of hands weaker than a king. I am ahead of a flush draw, even though, and I'll pause for a second, even though I am what was I gonna say? Yeah, it's usually a line I would take against a weaker opponent as far as betting the turn and like looking to get value from a flush draw or something. I don't expect him to check all the turn with just a flush draw. Like I said, which I am ahead of, but a lot of his middle-ish pocket pairs are gonna fold. He could easily have a 5-6 or something, which is fairly likely to fold the turn. I guess something more like 5-6 has the pair and the draw. Maybe it calls again, but 5-7, maybe ace-5 again is a pair to draw. But there's at least some reasonable chance that unless it's 4-5 that he will fold the turn. Certainly some middle pocket pairs in his range. Certainly some weaker draws which will fold, and that's not a bad thing. It is a spot where I don't think I'd fire the third barrel, but he's the point being he doesn't have a king here a lot. There isn't as far as the king high flop, it's not a flop which I'm going to be barreling a ton. So when I do have my inside straight draw, to the close enough to the nuts. I don't really think he has 4-6 here all that often to call pre-flop and then just check call this flop. So it's basically to the nuts with a 4. Also the overcard, my 6 will be good. More than never. If he has a hand like maybe ace 3 or something, which decided to check call the flop and call the turn. A little optimistic that my 6 is good, but certainly my ace, not too optimistic that it's good. 4 is almost always good. And he will just be folding this turn often enough to want to fire that barrel. I guess the main point of that being is, when it is a board but you aren't going to be firing multiple barrels on all that often, something like a king high dry flop or whatever, when you do have a bit of equity, it is good to find some sort of hands to fire a turn bluff with on a board like that, and inside straight draw is plenty. And I guess also it is a bit more of an example of how I'm going to take advantage of a bit of a tighter player. Not like, yeah, I guess there's a reasonable sense. I see a player like that, calling pre-flop with a pair of tens, a pair of jacks, and he very well might fold it to 2 barrels. So, it's not that unreasonable to think he could have folded something as strong as Jack's pair. Obviously, it's not his entire range, but it just goes to show that there are fairly strong hands in his range, which are pretty likely to fold to 2 barrels. Obviously, I just haven't played often enough with him to be very certain that's how he'll play Jacks or anything like that. But you can come up with a very conceivable explanation for why he'll have a decent second pair type hand, and pretty reasonable that he'll fold it again for a small cheap barrel. And like I went over before, I have plenty of equity. It looks like over on table 4, I had marked this player as being pretty decent. He is taking over my spot of raising. I guess it's just all in over here, is how you'd say his name. Weaker opponent, you want to isolate him in position. Good for it is his birthday. He's got a fish on his right. Ace king seems pretty standard. Raise for value from under the gun. Value bet on a flop. Nothing to really discuss there. have a feeling something is going to happen on this table. Let's see. I don't remember exactly if it was king nine, if I bluff raise them again or not, or we'll evaluate. Yeah, let's see what happens. Yeah, he leads into me again, and let's see. Do I go for it again? I do. Let's pause for a second. Like I said, I don't. Let's discuss a bit. I don't remember exactly what happens. I just remember raising him just about every single time he made a bet. Um, I guess at this point, given let's discuss the information that we have and kind of figure out if this is a good play or not. So far, we've seen him lead twice for 50 cents. The first time he outright folded. The second time he bet about 50 cents again on the river after the board got somewhat coordinated and folded to a raise. And the third time I was in a pot against him, he let out for $1 and then re-raised. So again, let's try to get into my head a bit because this has been a couple weeks and see if what I was likely thinking and if that makes any sense. I'm sure at the time my thought process was, well, my best information is that he's leading out for $1 when he hits a strong hand, because that's what he did on the Jack-Jack-5 board. He let out bigger, and he 3-bet, as opposed to the other times when he let out 50 cents. One time he folded, and one time he called, but ended up folding later on in the hand. So I guess even with I guess that's why I decided to just keep up the aggression, even with the dynamic, even with the fact that all these just as I've stated before in a video, I think against these weaker opponents, these donk leads, you should raise them until given a reason not to. And I've certainly been given a reason not to, because he's 3-bet. He just kept on getting more aggressive. First one he folded, second one he called, third one he 3-bet. I don't know, I guess I'd almost expect him to continue that and jam all in here. But, I don't know, I was able to level myself into thinking maybe he'll somehow give me credit this time. He bets smaller, less likely to have a hand, and maybe he'll think, well, I can't be that crazy to raise him 4 times in a row without finally having a hand here. The one thing I'll certainly say before getting results oriented, that's why I pointed it out here, is that I do like this bluff raise more than the last one. For the reasons I said before, as far as this one being a decent bit cheaper, and that small bit of information, that this is a small bet again, maybe is a bit of a weaker hand. So I would also like this play a lot better had I just outright folded the time before. And now all of a sudden, I let up off the gas pedal a bit, and now I'm raising again, it's a bit more credible. So here, maybe it's not, well, it's certainly not all that credible. We don't have to worry about that too much. But, given the rest of the information, I think this bluff raises. Okay, let's see if, it probably won't work out. Let's see, and he calls. Let's see how we play it here. Okay, at this point, I guess I decided to just see my equity with the 9 of hearts. I mean, I have a 9 of hearts, I have a decent flush draw, it's certainly good some of the time. I have a king overcard, certainly good some of the time, and I don't expect to be put to any tough decisions. I'm assuming I didn't bluff raise that, even though it's extremely tempting. At that point, I guess I figured I just have absolutely no credibility and decided to give up. Yeah, I'm sure I'm starting to learn my lesson at this point, that I can't just blindly raise him every time. I'm going to need some sort of a hand to play back at him. Oh, and I don't 3-bet my jacks for value. Let's pause for a second. The one thing about this opponent on table 1, and I did want to make a note of it before, if you remember the ace-king hand, first hand of the table, he posts under a gun, checks, and then calls a raise and folds a queen-7 flop. Ace-queen-7 flop. Ace-queen-x flop. I don't remember the third card exactly, but there was an ace and a queen in there, and a card below a 10. So, one thing which I wanted to go over, and a lot of students have this problem, is developing reads on opponents. What do you know? What don't you know? I mean, as far as one hand into the session against this guy, I know that he's not an extremely serious poker player. I mean, someone who's really trying to grind out, make a lot of money. They know that giving away a blind, posting one orbit early adds up. They know that check calling, or it's not quite limping, it's not, I guess it's check calling. However you want to describe that as far as posting and then calling a raise, not really a good play. If he had a hand which was, capable of calling a raise, he should have just raised it outright. If he had accidentally clicked the auto post button. So this is not the best opponent out there. So just given that, I think I could give more credibility to the fact that his min raise probably means a weaker hand a lot more often of the time, and he's very likely to call a 3-bet with a hand worse than jacks, even if he's an undergun raiser. I have a feeling at the time I was at 4Tables and, thinking about what commentary I was going to do, I saw he was playing 20-0. He hadn't raised yet, hasn't been playing a ton of hands. So I probably just took that little bit of HUD information and decided not to free bet. I just thought I was going up and back. But I think I should have recognized all of the information that I had. He's probably a bit of a weaker opponent. Min raise, probably a weaker hand, and went ahead and tried to free bet this hand for value instead of playing it cautiously. Against a lot of opponents, a lot of tighter opponents who will play closer to 20-0, free betting jacks for value is difficult. But I think it would have been just fine against this opponent. Over on table, well, let's see exactly what I'm doing. I opt to free bet my ace-5 suited over here. Pretty standard. Well, pretty standard. Pretty standard hand to be free betting is a bit of a bluff against an opponent who's going to be, he's a pretty tight player, but he's still going to open plenty of hands on the button. I don't want to take a flop with ace-5. With a tighter plan for big blinds, I expect to, just be taking a heads up flop out of position with a hand which is such a very small equity favorite against his range. I could run a poker stove or whatever. I would expect to be about a 55% favorite against his range. I don't know for sure, but small favorite at best. But I'm out of position and don't know much about his post-flop tendencies, so I'm just simply going to be check-folding a lot of flops. No real reason to just see a flop in position here, because I'm not going to win that many, I'll call it like uncontested flops. And uncontested, I would just mean is, well, basically what I'd be doing against him, as far as I will be checking to him, he'll see bet and he'll fold. I'm not going to win too many flops like that. Pots like that. If I'm in position, I might. If the flop comes 6, 7, 8, obviously I'd have an up and down straight draw. But, if it comes whatever middling card and it misses him, he may well check fold to me in position, but not as likely to check behind and give up when he is in position. So, out of position, I did decide to free bet this as a bluff. Flops plenty of equity, ace blocker, all things along those lines. Expect to pick it up a lot right here. And I was going to say, the other thing I was going to discuss is, it's my birthday over here. He has a very high VPIP and pre-flop raise. I have a feeling I want to play back at him. This is a pretty reasonable hand to do it with. The Jack-9 suited will play okay post-flop. I'm closing the action here. I guess the reason why I might not free bet it, I'm not sure what to do with this hand, is that my opponent might be calling free bets a bit lighter. I don't know that for sure, but it's my birthday. Given that he's a bit of a looser player, he's more likely to defend something like a king-jack or I don't know, maybe even ace-9 suited, something which has me dominated, whereas on table 1, I think I'm folding out, a lot of hands which are dominating me. All the ace-6, 7, ace-8, ace-9 suited type hands, I think the tighter player will fold all of them, even given where the races are coming from. Even with it being a button versus blinds battle, I think he'll fold every marginal hand. Whereas on table 4, I think I might get called by a lot of hands which are dominating me, and I think my opponent will c-bet more often. Therefore, Jack-9 suited, it does provide, given that it has straight and flush draws, a few reasonable options to check raise. So given these player types, I think it's pretty reasonable to call with my Jack-9 suited, given this player on this table. Now, I guess I'll just go ahead and take that one step further. If I had the Jack-9 suited and the small blind on table 2, I'd like a free bet as well against the tighter player, just to end the pot, end the hand right there, and again, fold out a lot of hands which are dominating me. Like I said, I think this player will fold. So let's see if any of that matters. If I do end up playing that Jack-9, or, well, looks like he jammed all in from the small blind. So I don't end up playing the Jack-9, I hope. Over on table 2, I think I just check call the flop. I decided to check call again on the turn, and that was nice. And reverse set. I believe my opponent had nothing, if I remember this hand correctly. I'm sure I'll go back and see. I don't believe he had a queen there. I'm sorry, I couldn't quite see what that was. We'll pause for a second. So yeah, one other thing, like I said before, I, quote-unquote learned from my opponent at this point. I believe he had something kind of random and spazzy, like actually, let's go back a second, and, it showed up. It was just very light. I couldn't quite catch it. So let's take a look. Like I said, we'll just review Jack's hand. It's a very clear check call on the flop of the Jacks. Certainly, board he's going to be c-betting with his entire range. On the turn, it gets, a bit more difficult. In that if my opponent's firing twice, he could fairly easily have me beat. But I think given how many draws are out there, and like I said, I thought my opponent was a bit spazzy, and it's a small bet as well. The whole point of calling with the jacks pre-flop was to play a bit of pot control, so all those reasons I decided to check call the turn as well. And let's see if we can catch what he had this time. And it looks like, oh, like 9-6 of spades. I can't quite make it out. Maybe if you guys see and know, I'll go ahead and play it. I think he made second pair there. If you guys can make it out a bit better than me, feel free to post in the comments at the end. But it looks like he had something like a kind of random suited connectish type hands, which made a pair on the turn. So, it looks like I'm going to be 3-betting this ace-king for value, pretty standard, even though this is against a somewhat tighter player, given the stack sizes, and, oh, not stack sizes, the positions, we're 100 big blinds deep, it's just a couple less of the positions, and the fact that I'm running fairly aggressively, I would be willing to 4-bet and get all in. Over here on table 2, this is a bit of an interesting spot. So basically, I decide to c-bet my normal amount. This is a fairly dry board. Obviously, the spades are out there, but two aces for the most part. You have it or you don't. I guess it's not. Oh yeah, given stack sizes, I don't need to rush for money, and if I have ace king or ace queen, and I bet roughly half pot, I could still very easily get all the money in, and there won't be too many second best type hands calling. I'd assume tens or jacks are fairly likely to call once if you slow played with like queens or kings. Certainly going to call at least once. But for the most part, as far as getting value, the half pot size bet works perfectly fine, and if I'm bluffing in this spot, it'll work okay as well, as far as if I have something like 6-7 suited and just want to fold out the king, queen, king, jacks in his range. I guess actually, to think a bit more deeper about this hand, if I did have a 6-7 suited, this would actually be a good spot to just check fold. Given what I said about his pre-flop tendencies, I don't think there are enough king, queen, king, jacks in his range to want to be bluffing here all that much. I think he'll just have an ace-king or ace-queen a bit too often. Given how tight he is, I think it's very likely that he would play ace-king a bit passively pre-flop. Certainly ace-queen he'd play like this. Or the middle pocket pair, which is pretty likely to call at least once. I guess, being a bit optimistic that I am 3-betting light from a small blind and maybe continuing as a bluff. So, like I said, if I didn't, obviously I have an ace here. I have a pretty strong hand to beat all those middle pocket pairs. It's difficult for him to have an ace, so I am good a lot. If I get raised, it's a difficult spot, but, I'd cross that bridge if it came along. But, I think this is a good c-bet size for my entire value range for sure. It looks like I opted to call with the ace-10 over here on table 4, and again, I think that was to allow the weaker opponent in the pot. So with the king turn card, I did not think this was a good spot to bet twice. Basically, my opponent's range looks like it may have some sort of a marginal ace, which I didn't expect him to call pre-flop with, but maybe he did, something like ace-10 or ace-jack suited. A middle pocket pair, which will certainly fold the turn. That's about it. There's not all that much else he could have here. Certainly, king, queen of spades is possible, if there's, one combo of that. 2 or 3 combos if you get a bit optimistic, adding in a king jack or a queen jack or whatever. But it is a tighter opponent, so he's not going to have too many of those suited Broadway hands, and he's certainly, or almost certainly not going to have any smaller suited hands. So checking here isn't really risking too much. Betting the turn is going to just fold out the tens and jacks and queens. If he had, or nines or whatever exactly middle pocket pairs he has, and it'll get called the not all that rare occasion when he has a better ace than me. Now, is his check fold on the turn? I don't think so. I have a feeling I would have check called the turn and check folded the river. It's not an ideal line. It can possibly be extremely exploitable, but I don't First off, it's very difficult for your opponents to realize exactly what you're doing if you play a hand like that. So you'd have to play with a player a lot to really be exploited, and your opponent would have to be aggressive. When you check call this turn here, when I check call this turn here, I'm going to have a lot of showdown value. Whether it's something like, king, queen, which turns a king and decided there's no reason to bet, an ace-5 type hands being very, very much top of my range, or maybe 2 queens, which somehow think they could possibly still be good, which is, reasonable enough. If I have queens here, it's not like my opponent has a king very often. Like I said, his flop calling range was 9s, 10s, jacks, a few marginal aces, so queens are good. Some. So if I do check call this turn, it's going to look like I have a pretty strong hand. So my opponent barrels the river. He's either going to be, crazy aggressive and, and has a great read on me, which is going to be possible when you move up in stakes, or he's just going to have it. So I think this is a spot where you could probably get away with check call turn, check fold river. Your opponent's just not going to be bluffing ace-5 here. It is a bluff catcher. Certainly, if I improve a river, I wouldn't fold. If a river's a 2, a king, or a 5, or an ace. But I think we all know I'm not folding an ace river. Let's see, I hope I don't bluff race. I check call. Well, let's pause for 1 second. So two things. First off, I do go for my value bet over on table 2. At this point, I think my line is a bit fishy. As far as, I, well, yeah, I could be representing just a random kind of spastic bluff, and make my opponent get curious as for what I have. So as far as, well, how am I representing this bluff? Well, pre-flop I 3-bet from a small blind versus button opener. I think earlier in this video I 3-bet something like a king 7 suited, on a different table. I talked about 3-betting a possibly jack 9 suited. I do only have ace 5 suited, so I very well could be 3-betting some marginal hands out of a blinds here. So, reasonably I could have 9-10 of diamonds or something. Like I just did discuss, in this video, I'm not quite sure how good an idea it is to c-bet on this board with a 9-10 of diamonds, but with 10 high, given that I'm playing 4 tables, and haven't, quite given a ton of thought in that situation previously against such a tight opponent, there's a reasonable chance for sure, partially that I'd actually do it, and for sure partially in his mind, if I have 10 high, it seems very reasonable to just go ahead and take one stab at the flop and hope his range was wide enough to find the fold with some sort of a king high or whatever. So, there's a way where, in his mind, again, I could certainly have just some random 10 high type hand, give up, again, playing out this hands from his point of view. I give up with my bluff on the turn, and now I see a spade river. He's very unlikely to have a flush draw. It's kind of a scare card. So I, kind of randomly, spastically decide to bluff it. It's a bit creative again. Like I say before, a bit of an optimistic story, but it makes some sense. I don't think I'm beat here really ever. I think if he has the ace 6 through ace jack or so, those marginal-ish aces, which probably don't raise the flop, which are better than me, I think they all bet the turn. And I think he has the, 9s through queens a lot, roughly in that range, maybe 8s. So I felt pretty confident betting this river, looking a bit bluffy. I guess if I really wanted to represent a bluff, I could have bet a bit bigger. I think I do settle with my half pot size bet. So, I wanted to look a little bluffy and try to induce the hero call. Over on table 4, I check call this flop with the ace 10 offsuit. I guess my thought process was it's such a weak opponent. I have 2 overcards. I have a backdoor flush draw. Maybe my hand's good here some, and it was a very small bet. I'll try to find a way to take away the pot from him later or something like that. I don't know. Out of position, not a ton of money in the pot. It's, like I just said before, it's optimistic. I'm having a few optimistic plans for hands here. I'm not quite sure I could. Even, I hate, again, and it's another situation of being extremely exploitable as far as check folding a flop to like a small bet, another 50-cent bet. It just allows your opponents to get away with a lot if you're going to play so fit or fold. But this is an opponent who's clearly shown tendencies to make that small bet and then call a big raise. So, the easiest way to just play against this guy is to be a bit exploitable at first, fold to a few of his bets, and then don't take it all when you finally have something. I don't choose that line. I decided to call the flop, and let's see how I played it out. I think, like I said before, I haven't played this session in a while. Look for a mistake. I wouldn't mind calling that a mistake at this point at all. It looks like my opponent does check behind and allow me to see my backdoor flush, and I'm able to get a value bet. So that worked out. It looks like my opponent had ace 5. He made a straight on the river. So I guess maybe I had the best hand on that flop. Again, I'm sorry. I'll go back to just kind of catch that. Oh no, he had he covered the river with. I think I saw this one a bit more clearly, but I'll pause it again just because I'm a bit curious. Yeah, he had ace 5 suited. He called the river with like middle pair on a pre-flush board. That's the reason why I continued with the hands, because I felt my opponent might make kind of huge mistakes later on, and he did. So maybe it wasn't the worst call in the world, but I had to get pretty lucky. I was obviously dominated in that spot. So it is what it is. I'm sure it wasn't terrible, but it's going to be difficult to play ace 10, no pair, no draw, profitably out of position. This 5-6 hand gets very interesting from what I remember. Quickly, just to close up on that ace-5 hand, I bet half upon him river. My opponent tanked for a while and folded. This 5-6 hand, let's play it out. I believe I end up, like, bet folding versus river. I think I'm happy with how I played it, but it certainly got pretty interesting. So this is definitely a spot I want to lead out with my hand. Two pair on a board where plenty of worse can call, obviously. And it goes check min raise. So given that this is a tight opponent, he's playing 13-9, I lead out into the field, he calls, and he min raises. His hand looks outrageously strong to me right here. There's just, in my, or at the time, in my view, there's just no way for him to be bluffing. There aren't really worse hands he'll do this for value with. At least I doubt it. I'd have to imagine from small blinds, given the limper, he's going to raise queens or better. Jacks are better for sure. Also, as far as hands which I may beat, a set are better. He's going to, probably. Well, not check min raise with a hand like 7-8, or if he has a draw, I expect him to raise bigger to actually get a fold. And if he does have a jack, again, I don't really expect to check min raise. It looks like he has a hand which has this board absolutely crushed. So a few things to discuss. First of all, if he does have this board absolutely crushed, it's very hard for him to have fives or sixes. Only one combo of each of those left. And then jack 5 and jack 6 is, well, the two hands which I guess I'm a bit afraid of as far as if he had jack 5 or jack 6 suited. I guess it really comes down to these two contradicting points as far as on one hand, it just doesn't look like he's bluffing. And if he's not bluffing, I'm not in great shape. I doubt he's going to play Jack 10 like this. Given that he's at 13-9, seems to kind of understand, well, I don't know about understand hand values. But, he'll probably want a very strong hand to value. He probably won't view Jack 10 offsuit as the nuts on this board. On the other hand, it's difficult for him to have anything. So, because of that, it's a bit of a confusing spot. As far as calling here, it does a few things. First off, if there is a bad turn card, it allows him to get off cheaply. Now, how many bad turn cards are there? Not too many. A jack is a bad turn card. Obviously, 7, 8, 9, 4. Those aren't great, but it's not like my opponent's going to have a straight all the time by any stretch of imagination. So, the only very bad turn card is a jack. But I have position on jam. It allows the beast to stay in the pod and possibly put in more money bad. So for all those reasons, instead of isolating the fish, and, if my opponent does get it all in here, I'm dead. There's no real way for him to have. There's no way he's gonna check min raise and stack off a ace jack or something. If he gets it all in, then he found some nitty way to have a pair of jacks, or I just got very unlucky to run into two fives or two sixes, which I'm drawing dead against one of them, drawing very slim against the other, or certainly also conceivable that he has that jack 5 or jack 6 suited. So for all these reasons, I decided to just call here and reevaluate on the turn. Even though certainly bottom two pairs is often a hand you want to play it fast, I just found no reason to play it fast in this exact particular situation. Ace on the turn, obviously not a great card for me. The ace jack gets there. That's the reason it's not too great. Clearly, again, he's not gonna have ace jack all the time, but possible. It's certainly within the realm of possible hands. So my opponent, and now jam does just check fold this turn. So what it looks like, my best guess as far as what happened, I really have to just attribute that to a misclick. I honestly can't figure out any other reason for that to have happened. I think I got a bit thrown off there. It really didn't make any sense as far as him check min raising this flop really with anything, and it probably is because it's not the play my opponent was looking to make. Maybe I'm jumping to a bit of a conclusion there, but if you guys can come up with a better reason for why he might have played like that, feel free to post it in the comment section. Particularly with how fast he check folded the turn. There's no decision there. It's not like he would have just check folded like slow played kings. He might have checked them, but I'm not quite sure he'd fold or anything. So at this point, we have our weaker opponent, the beast over there, still in the pot. As far as what sort of a hand I think he may have, a bit difficult to say, but I certainly think he could still just have a jack at this point as far as him calling on the flop. Certainly a bunch of straight draws, which I guess would make some sense to just check call here and hope to induce a bluff from 7-8, but I figure my opponent's a bit more likely to get stubborn with the jack. It's because he's a weaker opponent. I thought he might call a river bet, even with the board coming out pretty, poorly for a jack, with the ace coming off. It's not like I'm going to have an ace all that often. I don't know if he's thinking that or realizing that. It's probably just more likely a scare card to his jack than anything else. But realistically, I'm just not going to have an ace here often at all. I guess maybe ace 6 or certainly I mean, ace jack would have raised pre-flop. Ace six is the only one which makes any sense, but the weaker opponent might not know that. So, basically it comes down to, is there more value in checking and trying to induce a bluff from some sort of a misdraw? The 7-8 being the most likely one. As far as being an up and down straight draw, 4-7 got there. I'm not sure he's calling twice with like 4-2, which also got there. Or 7-5, or if you ever kind of inside straight draws. So either check and try to induce from, it's mostly particularly 7-8, or try to get some thin value out of something like Jack King. And I decided to go for a value bet, and we'll continue playing out the hand. I want about a half pot value bet. Like I said, I'm trying to get value out of a jack here, so I don't think he's going to call a ton with second pair on this river, but I think this is a good way to get him to call something. And he does end up jamming all in. So at this point, I just decided my opponent isn't bluffing here anywhere near often enough for me to want to continue. I think there is certainly some way for him to have a stronger two pair, given again that he's a weaker opponent. Maybe he has Jack 3 suited. Maybe he has. Well, I want to say somehow aces up, like ace 3. I don't really think he could have that. But certainly, possibly calling twice with a straight draw. There is up and down straight draw as far as 4-7, which would make sense. He could have easily played a 4-7 suited. Pocket threes don't make a ton of sense, but are possible. There's also the chance that he just slow played something kind of the whole time. Whether that be two aces, two sixes, two fives, maybe ace jack, which he just didn't want to raise at any earlier point. The key here mainly being there is only one busted draw, and I don't think he's gonna, call jam all in with a 7-8 at this point. It's just a very, very tricky aggressive line. When you see it from a weaker opponent, it's not so much tricky aggressive as it's desperate, I think. But I still didn't expect it out of him. Clearly, my hand is a bluff catcher. There's just no way he's going to play. I mean, maybe he will stick it all in on the end with Jack 10, just kind of because he's a weaker opponent, doesn't know what he's doing. But, by any normal stretch of the imagination, this is a bluff catcher. I'm only beating him here if he either knows that he's bluffing or just is bluffing, even if he doesn't know it. So I opt to just go ahead and bet fold for river. And I don't think he shows me a bluff. I hope not. I'll discuss table 3 as well, and I'll get into it, starting right now, and then we'll call it a video. Basically, blind response, ace-2 offsuit probably is just a bit too loose to defend. Maybe 3-betting and turning into a bluff would be a bit better. I remember my thought process at this point was that the small blind had been playing a bit aggressively, and I was looking to take a stand against him, but I don't quite remember seeing it in this video, so I'm not sure which read is off at this point. But, well, let's play it out. Let's make sure it's the right hand, one I think it is. And I'm pretty sure what I'm expecting to happen here is for my opponent to just bet 3 times, and even though the board runs out pretty well for my hand, I believe I fold the river. So let's just kind of make sure it's the right hand, and then see how it goes. And yeah, this is certainly the hand I was thinking of. So yeah, it's another spot where over here on table 3, my hand is still a bluff catcher. I'm not so, there's certainly a reasonable chance this is a split pot. My opponent can have an ace with a kicker, which doesn't beat a jack at this point. But basically, when I call here, I don't think my opponent's going to fire 3 times at this board as a bluff. As far as there being bluffs in his range, well, one thing, return him as a club. As far as hands which he will double barrel as a bluff, a lot of them are going to be flush draws, and they got there. So that takes a bunch of bluffs out of his range. The other, few possible bluffs in his range are a few straight draws, which all missed. The queen 10s, the 10-8s, the lower equity of inside straight draws, king queen, king 10, along those lines. So for my opponent to fire 3 barrels with all of those hands, basically after I called twice on this board, my hand looks very much like an ace. I don't expect my opponent to try to bluff me off an ace. That was mostly my thought process at this point over on table 3. Like I said, at the time, I don't quite remember it. You guys could go back and check. He's running 29-27. I remember him playing aggressively against me. So I have a feeling he was an aggressive opponent because I had that read on him at that time. And given that, I think he'd be a bit less likely to fire the third barrel at this point. Figuring that if I had been letting myself get run over at this point, I'm not going to take a stand for Jack or anything like that. I still think when I call twice here, it does look a lot like I have an ace. Clearly, as far as in his range, he has stronger aces. He has plenty of nines. Given that he's an aggressive opponent, he might raise 9-2 suited from a small blind and decide to c-bet and bet again on his flop. So as far as very strong hands in his range pre-flop, which have me beat, ace is better than mine, ace jack or better. And pocket jacks, and as far as weaker hands, which have me beat any 9x, and flush draws, which double barreled. So there are plenty of hands in both his bluffing range and his value range, which have me beat. I think my hand just, I just have to have showdown value at this point in my hand. I'm gonna fold the turn with an up and down straight draw and have the board's paired, so it just looks too much like I have an ace here. My opponent's still going for thin value. The one thing I'd point out is, turning my hand into a bluff and jamming the river. As far as, I'm gonna kind of level one-ish, level one thought process, leveling, standpoint is reasonable. And why I'm saying that is that his bet sizing on the river does look like a finished value bet. It's not that thin with like ace queen. Ace queen's like, almost always good here, so it's not that thin. But clearly it's still one pair, top pair, good kicker. If I jam all in, if he's not thinking, he may find a fold, but I'm just not representing anything. If he's able to stop and think through the hand and realize that I just very rarely have a flush here. I guess I have a flush on occasion. It's possible for me to defend pre-flop with those similar straight draw type hands I mentioned my opponent might have with clubs. Those hands are probably going to call again on the turn, even though the board's paired. And then I'd likely raise the river if I made a flush. I really don't see, occasionally I'll be up against a full house, but I think, like I said, given his bet sizing, I think he's just more likely to be going for a value bet with either like 9-10 or, like I said, maybe he just had 9-2 suited and decided to be raising regardless from a small blind because I'm playing tight. So either a value bet with a 9 is possible, but like I said, because it's a bit on the smaller side of a value betting spectrum, I thought a pretty good ace was more likely. And those are bluff catchers on the river, but my play just looks too much like a bluff. And obviously, it would be. I have a hand that'd be turning into a bluff, so I decided not to make that play. And I do fold. So, okay, I'm going to leave the video off here. It looks like we have a few interesting hands already starting to develop on some other tables, which should be good to go over for the next part of this review. So, as always, feel free to leave some comments and feedback in the thread for this video. Like I mentioned throughout the video, there were quite a few interesting spots, so feel free to leave either your take on those hands, or certainly if you have any more questions, anything else you'd like me to go over. This is Neil Gewirtz with BlueFirePoker.com.